The Livonian War, a significant conflict over the rich region of Livonia, now modern-day Latvia and Estonia, which unfolded between the years of 1558 and 1583. Initiated by Ivan the Terrible of Russia, who sought access to the Baltic Sea, the war soon involved other major powers, including the Kingdom of Poland, the Swedish Empire, and Denmark-Normandy, each aiming to curb Russian expansion and protect their own interests. The war saw Russia initially seizing Livonia, but unable to sustain its hold due to multiple fronts and internal issues, facing pushbacks from the newly formed Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the growing power of Sweden. The conflict finally ended in 1583, forcing Russia to relinquish its claims on the territory. Not many people talk about it, but I do. Hello and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, good to meet you, and if you're coming back, great to have you with me again. As always, if you want to support the channel, you're already doing it. I bet you didn't even know that. But just by enjoying the content, that is enough for me. But for those who want to go above and beyond, you may refer to the video description, or just like and subscribe. Always greases the wheels. And now, for our somewhat avant-garde topic of the day, we go back to the 16th century, to that conflict that no one really talks about. By the mid-16th century, old Livonia was economically prosperous, but it was politically fragmented and religiously divided within the decentralized Livonian Confederation. This was a region that included the Livonian branch of the Teutonic Order, several prince-bishoprics such as Dorpat and Oselviak, and the Archbishopric of Riga, the city of Riga, and Kurland. Now, cities like Riga, Dorpat, and Reval, along with the knightly estates, held privileges that allowed them significant autonomy. Thus, the Confederation's common institutions were limited to the landtags, which were assemblies that convened regularly but did not manage to consolidate power effectively. Tensions were exacerbated by rivalries, notably between the Archbishop of Riga and the Landmeister of the Order, each vying for dominance and power. The Reformation had reached Livonia in the 1520s, initiating this slow transition to Lutheranism and creating a schism within the order. You see, there were many members that had remained sympathetic to the old ways of Roman Catholicism. Not everybody had agreed with Martin Luther's revolution, and, well, there were some bitter memories from some of the violence of that time. Either way, this religious transformation and lack of strong centralized leadership had left Livonia vulnerable to external threats from both sides, and of course, the normal internal disputes. Push was certainly about to come to shove. The lesser nobles, including the Order's Landmeister and the Gebetigers, fiercely protected their privileges, resisting the formation of a more powerful noble class. The Archbishopric of Riga, however, was an exception, where Wilhelm von Brandenburg, with the support from his brother Albert of Brandenburg-Ansbach, overcame the resistance of these lesser nobles. Albert, a former Prussian Hochmeister who had secularized the Southern Teutonic Order state to become the Duke of Prussia in 1525, supported the appointment of one Wilhelm and his coadjutor Christoph von Mecklenburg. Their agenda in Livonia included establishing a hereditary duchy modeled after Prussian governance, contrary to the interests of those who oppose secularization and the dissolution of traditional order structures. And thus, as the Livonian War began, the Hanseatic League had lost its exclusive control over the lucrative Baltic Sea trade. The League, which was once dominant, now competed with emerging mercantile fleets from the Dutch 17 provinces, and of course France. The Hanseatic ships, outdated and less capable in combat compared to modern warships, struggled to maintain relevance. This decline in maritime prowess left the League unable to sustain a formidable navy, diminishing its trade shares and leaving its Livonian cities like Riga, Reval, and the trading partner Narva vulnerable without adequate naval protection. The Danish navy, the era's Baltic powerhouse, not only controlled the crucial access to the Baltic Sea, but also imposed tolls and commanded key islands like Bornholm and Gotland, enhancing their strategic naval dominance. But on the other hand, Sweden, constrained by Danish territories to the south and a dearth of year-round ice-free ports, found its access to Baltic commerce limited. However, Sweden did manage to thrive economically due to its exports of timber, iron, and notably copper, benefiting from a burgeoning navy and its proximity to the Livonian ports across the narrow Gulf of Finland. Prior ambitions by Sweden to expand into Livonia were thwarted by Russian intervention, culminating in the Russo-Swedish War of 1554–57 and the subsequent Treaty of Novgorod in 1557, which halted Swedish advances, albeit momentarily. Thus, by the mid-16th century, Russia had significantly expanded its territory and influence, and it managed to absorb the principalities of Novgorod in 1478 and Sukhov in 1510, becoming a formidable eastern neighbor to Livonia. This expansion continued as Russia annexed the Khanates of Kazan in 1552 and Astrakhan in 1556, further strengthening its position. However, Russia faced challenges with its isolation from sea trade, notably with the new Ivangorod port, built by Tsar Ivan the Terrible on the Narva River in 1550, which had proved over time to be quite inadequate, mainly due to its shallow waters. Tsar Ivan IV, seeking to ensure access and control over the Baltic, demanded the Livonian Confederation pay about 6,000 marks to maintain the bishopric of Dorpat, claiming historical dues paid to Sukhov when it was independent. The Livonians agreed to pay by 1557, but failed, leading to the breakdown of negotiations. Ivan used this failure as a pretext to threaten military force to secure a trade corridor linking the Baltic with Russia's new territories near the Caspian Sea, emphasizing the need for advanced weaponry imports in case of conflict with Western powers. Meanwhile, Polish king and Lithuanian Grand Duke Sigismund II Augustus was concerned about Russian ambitions, which threatened important trade routes and political balance. Sigismund supported his cousin, Wilhelm von Brandenburg, the Archbishop of Riga, against the Livonian Order's Landmeister, Wilhelm von Fürstenberg. Sigismund aimed to turn Livonia into a vassal state, just like the Duchy of Prussia under Duke Albert. But the problem was, local support for this was weak. Back in Livonia, internal conflicts escalated when von Fürstenberg captured key strongholds in 1556, leading to the capture and detention of von Brandenburg and Christoph von Mecklenburg. This triggered diplomatic efforts for their release, involving various European powers. A planned meeting in Lübeck in 1557 to resolve these issues was cancelled due to disputes and infighting, prompting Sigismund to intervene militarily after the killing of his envoy. Now on to Sigismund, whose invasion forced a reconciliation among the Livonian parties, leading to the Treaty of Pozvol in September of 1557. This treaty formed a defensive and offensive alliance against Russia and set the stage for the broader conflict, an alignment that reshaped the entire regional dynamic. Ivan IV perceived the Livonian Confederation's alliance with Polish-Lithuanian Union under the Treaty of Pozvol as a breach of the earlier 1554 truce that prohibited alliances with Poland-Lithuania. This prompted Ivan to invade Livonia on the 22nd of January 1558. Locally, many Livonians saw Russian troops as liberators from their German oppressors, and thus they let them pretty much march right in. Several Livonian forces quickly fell. Russian forces captured Dorpat in May and Narva in July, and later besieged Reval. Despite the initial setbacks, the forces of Livonia, bolstered by 1,200 landsknechts, 100 gunners, and substantial ammunition provided to them by the Germans, managed to recapture Wesenberg and a few other key strongholds. However, significant territories like Dorpat and Narva remained under Russian control. Thus the Russian advance was led by the Khan of Kasim Shagali, alongside other Tatar princes, commanding a mix of Russian boyars, Tatar, and Pomesno cavalry, predominantly accompanied by foot soldier Cossacks. Thus Russia continued to consolidate its gains through 1559 and 1560, one after the other. Of course, immediately after the invasion from the Russians, Livonia sought assistance from Emperor Ferdinand I, without success, and subsequently sought protection from Poland-Lithuania, the next best option. The Landmeister von Fürstenberg fled, and Gotthard Kettler took his palace. In June of 1559, Livonia formally came under Polish-Lithuanian protection with the First Treaty of Vilnius. Yes, indeed, that is the capital of Lithuania. Though the Polish Sejm hesitated to ratify the treaty, seeing it as only pertinent to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. As Russian forces continued their incursions, Livonia attempted to negotiate a pause by signing a 6-month truce with Russia from May to November, while the Russians engaged in their own Russo-Crimean wars, keeping them busy enough, hopefully, as the Livonians had thought, busy enough to ignore their territories at least for a little while. But in January 1560, amid the ongoing conflict on all sides, Sigismund of Poland-Lithuania sent the ambassador Martin Volodkov to Ivan's court in an unsuccessful attempt to halt the Russian military's devastation of the rural parts of Livonia. Russian military tactics during their advance into Livonia included numerous small campaigns and very effective sieges, leveraging musketeers and artillery to breach wooden defenses, which in some parts of the world, well, musketeers and artillery were still a little bit new. Of course, we had cannons since that terrible, terrible day in 1453 when we lost Constantinople, but still, some people took a little while to catch up. Not a good sign, though, when your enemy has the cannons and muskets and you don't. Now, back to the main topic. Well, despite capturing several fortresses like Felin, the Russians could not secure major cities like Riga, Reval, and Pernau. The Livonian knights faced a severe setback, however, at the Battle of Ergem in August of 1560, indicating deep-rooted issues within the Livonian defenses and possibly reflecting on some divisions within the Russian nobility about the timing of the invasion. You see, amidst these military engagements, the political landscape was always shifting. Eric XV of Sweden declined assistance requests from Livonian Order's Gotthard Kettler, as well as from Poland, leading Kettler to seek support from Sigismund II Augustus of Poland. The Livonian Order, which was unable to withstand the Russian onslaught, was simply dissolved in the Second Treaty of Vilnius in 1561. The treaty secularized the Order's lands, creating the Duchy of Livonia and the Duchy of Courland and Semigalia under the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, with Kettler becoming the first Duke of Courland, and, of course, converting to Lutheranism, raising a few eyebrows with that decision. Now, the Treaty of Vilnius included the Privilegium Sigismundi Augusti, which Sigismund used to guarantee Livonian estates certain privileges such as religious freedom according to the Augsburg Confession, and the maintenance of traditional German administration. Specifically, the treaty's terms on religious freedom explicitly prohibited any interference with the Protestant order by either religious or secular authorities, effectively allowing the entire institution to do whatever it wants and run rampant. But of course, during this period, some members of the Lithuanian nobility, discontent with the expanding Polish-Lithuanian Union, approached Tsar Ivan IV and simply offered him the Lithuanian crown. And, well, Ivan, he did publicly entertain this proposal, possibly as a genuine consideration, or more likely as a strategic move to buy time for bolstering his forces in Livonia. Throughout 1561, a Russo-Lithuanian truce was observed, but it was set to expire the following year, illustrating a temporary cessation of hostilities amidst all the complicated politics. In an effort to secure Danish protection and financial backing, Bishop Johann von Munchausen struck a deal on September 26, 1559, granting Frederick II of Denmark Normandy, Norway rather, I do apologize, the authority to appoint the Bishop of Osel-Vieck. This arrangement effectively sold these territories for a great sum. Frederick nominated his brother, Duke Magnus of Holstein, as bishop, who assumed control in April 1560. Concerned about increasing regional instability, Denmark-Norway sought to mediate peace once more. However, Magnus pursued his interests aggressively, buying the bishopric of Kurland without Frederick's approval, and attempting to expand into Harien-Virland, that being Harju and Virumma, clashing directly with King Erik of Sweden. Thus, in 1561, Swedish forces marched onto the scene, leading the noble corporations of Harien-Virland and Gerwen to submit to Swedish authority, thereby forming the Duchy of Estonia. Similarly, Reval, which was modern-day Tallinn, came under Swedish control. Denmark's dominance over the Baltic spurred Sweden's expansion eastward to challenge this control and to influence Western trade with Russia. These actions contributed to the onset of the Northern 7 Years' War, which is, of course, a topic for another video. Sorry about that. I'll get to it eventually, don't worry. So, by 1561, Frederick II had protested that Swedish presence in Reval, citing historical Danish claims to the territory. The situation escalated when Swedish forces captured another territory, Pernau, in June of 1562, and attempted to secure Swedish protection for Riga, leading to further conflict with Sigismund. But Sigismund had maintained ties with Erik XV's brother, John the Duke of Finland, who was later John III, and in October of 1562, John married Sigismund's sister, Catherine. This marriage thwarted a potential union with Ivan V. While Erik V initially approved the marriage, he was infuriated when John loaned Sigismund $120,000, receiving 7 Livonian castles as collateral. It's a great deal of money, by the way. This led Erik XV to simply arrest and throw John into prison in August of 1563, which of course prompted Sigismund to form an alliance with Denmark and Lubeck against Erik XV by October of the same year. The entry of Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Poland-Lithuania into Livonia marked the beginning of the greater struggle over the Baltic Sea, referred to as the Dominium Maris Balticae. The early years of this conflict, starting from the mid-16th century, were marked by intense military engagement. However, from 1562, a period of low-intensity warfare ensued and lasted until 1570, at which point the conflict escalated once again. During this time, the Nordic 7 Years' War, which involved Denmark, Sweden, and Poland-Lithuania, was primarily focused in the western Baltic, though Livonia did continue to hold its own strategic importance. Thus, by 1562, Denmark and Russia reached the Treaty of Mozask, which allowed for the mutual respect of claims in Livonia and maintained peaceful relations between the two. By 1564, Sweden and Russia also agreed to a 7-year truce. Both rulers of these nations, Ivan and Erik of Russia and Sweden respectively, exhibited signs of, well, let's just say, mental instability during this period. You may want to watch my video on Ivan. Ivan IV's establishment of the Oprichnina in 1565 led to a phase of political turmoil and near civil war within Russia, as he targeted and executed many nobles and common folk alike, contributing to an overall climate of fear and instability. Indeed, the epithet Ivan the Terrible was one that was very well and thoroughly earned. It's not just a nickname. Now, when the Russo-Lithuanian truce expired in 1562, Tsar Ivan of Russia declined an extension offered by Sigismund II of Poland-Lithuania, opting instead to simply reinforce his military presence in Livonia. This, of course, led to an all-out invasion of Lithuania, marked by the capture of Vitebsk and a significant victory at Polotsk in 1563. Despite initial losses, Lithuania managed notable victories at the Battle of Ulla in 1564 and Sasniki in 1567, amidst the ongoing skirmishes. But of course, this period was also troubling for Ivan IV, who faced internal dissent, notably from Andrei Kurbsky, a former ally who had defected. In response to perceived threats and disloyalty, Ivan relocated his capital to the Alexandrov Kremlin and intensified his oppressive Oprichnina campaign to eliminate opposition. In 1566, Lithuanian diplomats proposed a division of Livonia with Russia, aiming for a joint effort to expel Swedish influence from the region. However, Russian diplomats viewed this as a sign of Lithuanian weakness and countered by demanding complete control over Livonia, including key trading posts such as Riga, which was of course vital for Lithuanian commerce. The negotiations broke down, leading to the resumption of hostilities. It was on again, well and truly. The complex situation in Livonia and the ongoing conflict eventually led to the Treaty of Lublin in 1569, which united Poland and Lithuania into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, incorporating Livonia under their joint sovereignty. This new political entity aimed to consolidate power and manage regional threats more effectively. At least, that was the idea. Now, by 1570, a temporary truce was reached with Russia, and it lasted 3 years. However, the death of Sigismund II in 1572 initiated the first free election in Polish history, raising significant succession questions. Ivan IV proposed radical terms for a potential personal union, which were ultimately rejected by the Polish-Lithuanian nobility, leading to the election of one Henry of Valois as the new monarch. In 1564, the Treaty of Dorpat marked a significant accord between Sweden and Russia, with Russia finally acknowledging Swedish control over Reval and other fortresses, while Sweden recognized Russian sovereignty over the majority of Livonia. This was an agreement that led to a 7-year truce between the two nations, which started in the following year, 1565. However, they rarely last. Internal turmoil in Sweden led to the overthrow of Eric XV in 1568 due to his involvement in the Stur murders, resulting in his half-brother John III ascending to the throne, and with him all of his new, fancy ideas. So, during this period, both Russia and Sweden were preoccupied with internal and external pressures, and both of them were eager to avoid an intensification of the conflict in Livonia. Simply too much dust to sweep up at home, it seems. No one really wanted to be involved in an international conflict when there was so many troubling things already behind them. Now, Ivan IV of Russia had previously shown interest in marrying the Polish-Lithuanian princess Catherine Jagiellonica, who was now John III's wife. To assert his claim, Ivan IV sent a delegation to Sweden in 1567 to demand her hand in marriage. This, of course, this did not make John III very happy, that someone had sent a bunch of his friends to simply say, "We would like to take your wife back to marry our friend." Indeed, John was understandably upset. Wouldn't you be? Tensions heightened once more. So, in July of 1569, John III dispatched a diplomatic mission led by Paul Justen, the Bishop of Arbo, to Russia. But the delegation arrived in Novgorod in September, facing harsh treatment. They were not welcome. The local governor, refusing direct negotiations, demanded that the Swedish envoys recognize him as the equal of their king. After what was very short glances at one another, they simply refused this demand. But of course, this led to the mistreatment and even the public humiliation of the Swedish delegations. And those tensions, they kept being heightened again and again. By May in 1570, Ivan, returning to Moscow and having signed a truce with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, felt secure enough to dismiss the Swedish envoys without fearing immediate military repercussions. Thus negotiations continued in Novgorod, where the Russian demands only intensified. They wanted more and more, and it included the relinquishment of Swedish claims to Reval, military support, monetary compensation, access to Finnish silver mines, and the acceptance of Ivan's proposed title as, get this, Lord of Sweden. Now that's a hard pill to swallow for the Swedes, isn't it? Well, no surprise, the terms were deemed unacceptable by the Swedish delegation, which then departed following a final ultimatum from Ivan. As they were walking away, "Oh yes, if you don't meet these demands, it's war." Now, the failure to reach an agreement, of course, renewed hostilities. Justen was left behind, and King John formally rejected the Russian ultimatum. The breakdown in diplomacy led directly to the resumption of armed conflict, further destabilizing the already tense situation in the Baltic region. The Northern 7 Years' War, which erupted in 1563 and concluded in 1570 with the Treaty of Stettin, was primarily fought across western and southern Scandinavia, and involved several crucial naval battles in the Baltic Sea. This conflict underscored the escalating disputes between Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, influencing the broader regional dynamic of Northern Europe. During this war in 1565, when the Danish-held fortress of Varberg capitulated to Swedish forces, 150 Danish mercenaries managed to avoid the massacre of the garrison by defecting over to the Swedish side. Among these defectors was one Pontus de la Gardie, who later emerged as a pivotal military leader in the ongoing Livonian War. Now, back to the Livonian front, which also felt the war's impact, particularly during a naval operation in July 1569, when Danish Admiral Peder Munch bombarded the Swedish-controlled city of Reval from the sea. Although the Treaty of Stettin affirmed Denmark as a dominant force in northern Europe, it did not succeed in re-establishing the earlier Kalmar Union. The treaty imposed unfavorable conditions on Sweden, sparking a series of conflicts that eventually culminated in the Great Northern War, ending only in 1720. Under the terms of the Treaty of Stettin, Sweden was compelled to relinquish her territories in Livonia in exchange for compensation promised by the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II. However, the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II decided not to deliver the promised payment and diminished his influence in Baltic affairs. Consequently, the stipulations concerning Livonia in the treaty were largely disregarded, allowing the Livonian War to persist. Now, from Tsar Ivan's perspective, the treaty potentially enabled the regional powers to consolidate and form an alliance against Russia, and he couldn't have that, particularly as these powers were no longer embroiled in conflict with one another. They might turn against him. Well, in the early 1570s, King John III of Sweden contended with a significant Russian offensive in Estonia. The city of Reval, ever the battleground, successfully resisted sieges in 1570 and 71, though several smaller towns did fall to Russian forces. The conflict intensified on the 23rd of January, when a Swedish force of 700 infantry and 600 cavalry, led by Klas Åkesson Tott, engaged a much larger Russian and Tatar army of 16,000 men, commanded by Khan Sein Bulat, at the Battle of Lod near Kolover village. The confrontation culminated in the Russian capture and subsequent sacking of Weissenstein in 1573, where Russian forces notoriously roasted some of the Swedish garrison leaders alive, including the commander. Not a good way to go. Well, this brutal act was provoking a Swedish retaliatory campaign centered in Wesenberg, and they very angrily initiated it in November of 1573, with Klas Åkesson Tott in overall command and Pontus de Lugardie as the field commander. Concurrently, Russian forces conducted raids deep into Finland, reaching as far as Helsingfors, which was the old name for Helsinki, by the way, the capital of Finland, in 1572. A 2-year truce was eventually signed in 1575 to pause hostilities on this front. However, John's counter-offensive floundered during the siege of Wesenberg in 1574 due to internal infighting among German and Scottish units within the Swedish army and the severe challenges posed by fighting in harsh winter conditions. The ongoing war in Livonia imposed a heavy financial burden on Sweden. By the end of 1573, the Swedish crown was deeply indebted to its German mercenaries, owing them 200,000 thaler. In a desperate bid to secure more time for repayment, John offered the castles of Hapsal, Lille, and Lod as collateral, which, upon his failure to pay, were subsequently sold off to Denmark. Simultaneously, efforts by Magnus to besiege Swedish-controlled Reval faltered, receiving no support from either Ivan of Russia or his brother Frederick II of Denmark. Frederick's reluctance likely stemmed from a newfound spirit of Swedish-Danish cooperation that dissuaded him from invading Livonia on behalf of Magnus, whose territory was then a Russian vassal. The siege was ultimately abandoned in March of 1571. Following this, Swedish military actions in the Baltic increased, bolstered by the passive support of Sigismund, John's brother-in-law. Now, during the Russo-Crimean Wars, Crimean Tatars devastated Russian territories, culminating in the burning and looting of Moscow. Concurrently, Russia grappled with drought and epidemics that severely impacted its economy, while Ivan IV's Oprichnina policy disrupted government operations. Following the defeat of Crimean and Nogai forces in 1572, the Oprichnina was dismantled, leading to significant changes in the structure and strategy of the Russian military. Ivan IV shifted from relying on a few thousand skilled troops and mercenaries to forming his army with tens of thousands of native troops, Cossacks and Tatars. By 1576, Ivan's military strategies were gaining ground, and in 1577, 30,000 Russian soldiers crossed into Livonia, launching devastating attacks on Danish territories in retaliation for Denmark's acquisition of Hapsal, Lille, and Lode. That's right, they wanted those castles. Now, this aggression effectively ended Danish influence in Livonia, completely wiping them out, as Frederick II of Denmark receded from the region, accepting deals with Sweden and Poland that completely terminated Danish involvement. Swedish forces found themselves once again besieged in Reval, and Russian troops conducted extensive raids across central Livonia, reaching as far as Dunaburg, which was under Polish-Lithuanian control since the 1561 Treaty of Vilnius. The territories conquered during these campaigns either submitted to Ivan directly or to his vassal, Magnus, whom Ivan had declared monarch of the Kingdom of Livonia in 1570. However, Magnus soon defected from the Russian side, independently appropriating castles, which of course, made the Tsar a little bit unhappy. When Kokenhausen submitted to Magnus to avoid conflict with Ivan's forces, the Tsar responded harshly by sacking the town and executing its German commanders. The campaign subsequently focused on Venden, the historic heart and former capital of the Livonian Order, which held both strategic and symbolic significance in the region. In 1576, Stefan Bathory became King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania after a contested election against the Habsburg Emperor Maximilian II, whose death in 1576 prevented further conflict. Bathory, supported by his fiancée, Anna Jagiellon, faced initial resistance from Danzig, which was resolved in 1577 when he conceded more rights to the city. He also secured military support from Prussia by appointing George Frederick as administrator in exchange for funding his campaign against Russia. Despite limited support from Polish vassals, Bathory recruited mercenaries from across Europe for his military efforts. In 1577, he formed an alliance with the Swedish King John III against Ivan of Russia, although tensions were exacerbated by unresolved inheritance issues from Sigismund II. Thus this period saw the capture of Dunnaburg by Lithuanian forces and Venden by Polish-Swedish forces in 1578, though a Russian attempt to retake Venden was tried and, well, they failed. The conflict intensified more when Ivan sent 18,000 troops in 1578, retaking Oberpalen, but failing at Venden against a significant Polish, Lithuanian, and German force, marking Ivan's first major defeat in Livonia. Bathory then improved military strategies by enhancing the hussars and artillery and recruiting even more Cossacks. He assembled a large force for an assault on Russia in 1579, capturing Polotsk and advancing through several fortresses. However, financial constraints always limit one's success, don't they? And it led to the culmination of the Truce of Jam-Zapolsky. Parallel to these events, Sweden saw significant military activity under Pontus de la Gardie, culminating in the capture of Narva in 1581, after many earlier failures. This victory was part of a broader Swedish campaign that secured multiple strategic locations, enhancing Swedish position in Livonia, despite ongoing disputes over formal control with Poland. Now the 1582 Truce of Jam-Zapolsky, facilitated by Jesuit papal legate Antonio Posavino, marked a significant moment in the hostilities between Russia and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This agreement, viewed as a humiliation for Tsar Ivan IV, who initiated the request for a truce, required Russia to surrender all its remaining territories in Livonia, including the strategic city of Dorpat, back to the Commonwealth. Additionally, the city of Polotsk was to remain under Commonwealth control. While the truce allowed Russia to retain any Swedish territories it captured, specifically Narva, it mandated the return of Velike Luki to Russia from Bathory's control. Despite the efforts to include Swedish interests in the negotiations led by Antonio Posavino, these attempts were ultimately dismissed, likely due to collusion between Ivan and Stefan Bathory. The resultant armistice was not a comprehensive peace treaty, but rather a temporary halt to hostilities, set to last 10 years with provisions for renewal. Indeed, the truce was renewed in 1591, and again 10 years later in 1601. Parallel to the Russo-Polish negotiations, a separate truce unfolded between Russia and Sweden. The Truce of Plusa, finalized on the 10th of August 1583, concluded the direct conflict between Russia and Sweden. Under this agreement, Russia ceded most of Ingria to Sweden, including strategic locations like Narva and Ivangorod. Initially set for 3 years, the truce was later extended until 1590. During these negotiations, Sweden ambitiously demanded substantial Russian territories, including the entire city of Novgorod. Although these demands were likely exaggerated for negotiating leverage, they show the Swedish territorial ambitions in the region. These truces collectively reshaped the politics of Northern Europe, temporarily stabilizing the region, but also setting the stage for future conflicts over the strategic and economically vital territories of the Baltic. Following the Livonian War, the Duchy of Courland and Semigalia, positioned south of the Daugava River, enjoyed political stability founded on the 1561 Treaty of Vilnius. This treaty, later augmented by the 1617 Formula Regiminus and Statuta Curlandiae, favored local nobles by reducing the duke's powers. Conversely, north of the Daugava, Stefan Bathory diminished the privileges once granted to the Duchy of Livonia, seeing the region as war spoils. Amidst all of these shifts, the Counter-Reformation was also gaining momentum, supported by Bathory's policies, which bolstered the Roman Catholic Church at the expense of the Protestants. However, these efforts did not significantly convert the predominantly Lutheran population of Livonia. Now, the region, for a long time after, had remained just as tumultuous. The Russo-Swedish truce ended in 1590, reigniting conflict that concluded with the Treaty of Teucina in 1595, 5 years later, where Sweden ceded territories back to Russia. And then there was the domestic strife in Sweden that led to a civil war and the eventual dethronement of Sigismund III by the Swedish Riksdag in 1599. The ensuing power struggles and wars, of course, bled over into Livonia, involving Swedish, Polish, Lithuanian, and Russian forces in various conflicts. It was during this period Sweden, under Charles IX, and later Gustavus Adolphus, managed to assert control over parts of Livonia, culminating in the establishment of Swedish Livonia. In 1629, the Treaty of Altmark and the 1645 Treaty of Bromsebro further solidified Swedish claims, with the latter treaty ceding Danish province of Osel to Sweden. And these territorial arrangements were upheld by subsequent treaties in 1660. The political configuration lasted until the early 18th century, when the Great Northern War resulted in Russian dominance over Estonia and Livonia, formalized by the Treaty of Nystad in 1721. This, of course, marked a significant shift in the control of the Baltic region from Sweden to Russian hands, and I suppose you'll have to hear about it once I make a video on the Great Northern War. Because for now, our time together has come to a close. I would like to thank my top-tier patrons and supporters. It is Eric, James, Tim, Wendy, Jeffrey, JC, Stark Factory, Charles, and Britt. Thank you very much. And if you would like to become a supporter, you know what to do. Take a look in the description. You'll find where you need to go. But I do hope you have enjoyed this video. I'm sure you probably didn't expect to see a 1-hour video, almost an hour, on the Livonian War, but, well, I often think, who else is going to make videos like this? If not me, then who? Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all.